It was one of those evenings that promised peace but carried an undercurrent of tension. My mother had insisted we all come together for Sunday dinner. Something normal, she said, like old times. The table was set with her usual perfection, silver polished to a mirror shine, roasted chicken steaming on its platter, and her prized crystal bowl gleaming in the candlelight. Everything looked beautiful, except for the invisible fault lines running beneath the conversation. My Uncle David was already halfway through his second glass of wine when I arrived with my son, Ethan. He's 12, quiet, thoughtful, and unlike any child I've ever known. Ever since he was little, he's been more interested in gears and circuits than soccer or cartoons. To him, wires and code were languages more comforting than words. I love that about him, though I've learned not everyone sees it that way. Dinner started fine, but as soon as the conversation turned to how Ethan was doing at school, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Uncle David never missed an opportunity to compare, to remind me that his kids were athletes, that his grandkids fit right in. When I mentioned that Ethan was working on a science project involving recycled electronics, David chuckled and said, "Still tinkering with his junk, huh?" Then he leaned back, smirking as if the wine had given him permission to say what he'd always wanted to. "You know, Anna," he said, swirling his glass, "that boy's never going to be normal. Maybe it's time you accept that." The words fell heavy on the table, like a knife dropped point first. My mother looked down. My husband's jaw tightened. For a second, I couldn't breathe. And that's when the kitchen door swung open. Ethan stood there, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes steady, holding something small, glowing, and humming softly in his palms. He looked right at my uncle and said, "Actually, Uncle David, I made something I think you should see." That night, the definition of normal changed for everyone at the table. Sometimes, grace arrives disguised as courage in a child's hands. I hadn't expected Ethan to come in then. He'd been in the garage most of the afternoon, working on what he called Project Orion. I thought it was just another experiment, some blend of wires, batteries, and tiny lights that made sense only in his mind. But as he stepped into the dining room, I realized this moment was different. His face carried that rare stillness children wear when they've crossed an invisible line between playing and proving. "Ethan," I said softly, afraid the tension at the table might crush whatever courage had brought him here. But he didn't look at me. His gaze stayed locked on my uncle, who had frozen mid-sip, his smirk faltering. The thing in Ethan's hands pulsed with a faint blue light, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to dim around it. "It's a communication module," Ethan explained, his voice trembling just slightly. "It helps people who can't speak use gestures and light patterns to express emotions. I built it for Noah." At the mention of Noah, my sister's son, who'd been born with a severe speech delay, the table went silent. Noah himself sat at the corner, fiddling with his peas, oblivious to the storm around him. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "You made that for Noah?" I asked, barely trusting my voice. Ethan nodded. "He can wear it on his wrist. It learns from his hand movements and turns them into light codes. Red for upset, green for happy, blue for calm. It took me 3 months, but it works." Uncle David shifted in his chair, suddenly looking smaller. He tried to speak, but Ethan pressed a small button, and the device glowed soft green. Noah looked up, eyes wide, and then smiled, a big, genuine smile that reached all of us. In that flicker of color, the dinner table's uneasy silence softened. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the start of something that could become it. Even the smallest light can change the way a whole room breathes. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, I sat with Ethan in the garage, surrounded by the quiet hum of his scattered inventions. The soft light from the ceiling bulb caught the reflection of copper wires, glass jars, and old circuit boards, his world, his refuge. "You didn't have to show him, sweetheart," I said gently. "I know how Uncle David can be." Ethan shrugged, twisting a small screwdriver between his fingers. "I wasn't showing him, Mom. I was showing Noah. He deserved to have a voice." His words settled deep in me. It wasn't just pride I felt. It was the dawning realization that my son understood something about kindness that the adults at that dinner table had long forgotten. But life in our family was never that simple. The next morning, my mother called. "Anna," she began, her tone careful, "David wants to see Ethan's invention again. He said he might have a business idea. I felt my stomach tighten. My uncle was a retired engineer who'd made his money by spotting potential, usually other people's, and reshaping it into profit. Tell him we'll think about it, I replied. But word spread quickly. Within days, relatives who hadn't called in years were suddenly curious about Ethan's invention. A cousin wanted to feature him in a school newsletter. Someone else suggested a patent. Everyone had advice, but few had asked Ethan what he wanted. That's when the real test began. Ethan's school science fair was coming up, and the rules were clear. All projects had to be original, no outside help, no financial backing. Uncle David offered to mentor him, help him present it properly. My mother thought it was a great idea. Ethan looked at me and asked the one question that pierced through the noise. Mom, if I let him help, does it still count as mine? It was the kind of question that no parent can answer lightly. That night, I realized the hardest test wasn't about circuits or inventions. It was about ownership, integrity, and the quiet courage to stay true when others want to claim your light. In the days that followed, Ethan's little invention took on a life of its own. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from relatives, teachers, even a local journalist who'd heard about the boy who gave color to feelings. Everyone seemed eager to celebrate him, yet every conversation circled back to my Uncle David. He was already talking about partnerships, prototypes, and potential investors. At first, Ethan was curious. He admired his uncle's confidence, the way he could make complex things sound simple. Maybe he could help me make it better, he said one afternoon, staring down at his circuit board. Maybe it could reach more kids. His words broke me a little. He wanted to do good, but I knew how easily good intentions could be reshaped by greed. So I told him, improvement is fine, Ethan, but don't let anyone make you smaller in your own story. Still, I didn't stop him from spending a Saturday at Uncle David's workshop. When he came back, he carried his backpack tighter than usual. Uncle David says we can patent it together, he murmured. He even printed a draft document. My pulse quickened. Did you sign anything? No, Ethan said quickly, shaking his head. But he said we should before the fair, or someone else might steal the idea. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. I found him in the garage, staring at his invention, the blue light flickering uncertainly. What if he's right, he whispered. What if someone does steal it? Then we'll rebuild, I said. Because what's inside you can't be stolen. The idea didn't come from his hands. Ethan, it came from your heart. He nodded slowly, though I could see the confusion behind his eyes. It wasn't just about an invention anymore. It was about trust, about knowing who to let in. And in the flicker of that soft blue light, I realized the puzzle wasn't mechanical at all. It was moral. The hardest inventions are the ones that test the boundaries of the soul. The science fair arrived on a cool Saturday morning. The gymnasium filled with the usual chaos, banners, poster boards, and the smell of glue sticks and nerves. Ethan stood beside his display, dressed neatly in the shirt his grandmother had ironed, his invention resting proudly on the table. A small crowd gathered as he demonstrated how the wristband changed colors with each gesture, translating feelings into light. It was beautiful, simple, human, alive. Then, halfway through the day, I noticed something odd. Across the gym, Uncle David was talking to one of the judges. I could see the glint of his business card changing hands, his rehearsed smile in full display. My stomach twisted. Moments later, a judge approached Ethan's table with a clipboard. Impressive work, she said warmly. But we noticed a similar prototype submitted last month for a patent review under the name David H. Collins. Any relation? The words hit me like ice water. Ethan's face drained of color. He said we were working on it together, Ethan stammered. The judge's expression softened. You might want to clarify the ownership before we move forward. It's an excellent project, but we need to make sure credit is correctly assigned. After she walked away, Ethan stood in stunned silence. He took it, he whispered. He really took it. I felt something rise in me, a mix of fury and sorrow. I'd seen David's kind of ambition before, but seeing it aimed at my son, at his innocence, made my blood run cold. We packed up early that day. Ethan didn't cry. He just stared out the car window, his reflection flickering between light and shadow as the sun passed through the trees. Halfway home, he finally said, maybe he was right. Maybe I'll never fit in. People like Uncle David always win. I reached for his hand and held it tight. Not always, Ethan. Some wins don't look like trophies. Some are just about not becoming like them. That was the day my son learned what real invention means. It's not creating things. It's creating integrity when it's hardest to hold. The following week was a blur of phone calls, tension, and sleepless nights. Uncle David didn't answer my messages, and when he finally did, his tone was smooth, too smooth. "It's a misunderstanding, Anna," he said. "I only filed the patent to protect Ethan's work. We'll put his name on it later. You should be thanking me." I could almost hear the smug smile through the phone. Ethan overheard the conversation. He didn't say a word, just went straight to the garage and shut the door. When I peeked in later, I saw him dismantling his invention. Every wire, every chip, every ounce of effort. "If he wants it so bad," he muttered, "he can have the pieces." It broke my heart. He had built that device with love, and now that same love was being twisted into something bitter. The next morning, I called my mother. She hesitated, then sighed. "You know your uncle. He thinks in business, not feelings. Maybe he really did mean to help." But I knew better. My uncle's version of help always came with a hook. And yet, fighting him wasn't simple. He had money, influence, connections. I had a 12-year-old boy and a promise I'd made to protect what was his. That's when Ethan surprised me again. "Mom," he said that evening, "what if I build something new? Something he can't take?" I blinked, unsure what he meant. He pointed to the circuit boards scattered on the table. "Project Orion isn't gone. It's just changing form. I learned what I needed to from it. Now I can make something that helps people connect, not just communicate." There was fire in his eyes again. Quiet fire, but unmistakable. I realized then that what Uncle David had stolen wasn't the invention. It was just the first draft of Ethan's courage. And my son was already rewriting it. True resilience isn't rebuilding what's lost. It's daring to begin again, with your heart still open. 2 weeks later, my mother decided to host another family dinner, this time to clear the air. I didn't want to go, but Ethan insisted. "I have something to say," he told me, his eyes calm but steady. There was a quiet gravity about him that both frightened and awed me. When we arrived, the house was already full. My uncle was at the head of the table, laughing too loudly, his wine glass half full. "Ah, there's my genius nephew," he exclaimed, as though nothing had happened. "We've got exciting news, don't we?" Ethan didn't respond. He set his backpack down gently beside his chair. My mother fidgeted with her napkin, and my husband gave me a look that said, "Be careful." Dinner began in uneasy politeness. Then, just as the plates were cleared, Ethan stood up. "Uncle David," he said softly, "I made something new. I'd like to show you." David smirked, leaning back. "Already? You work fast, kid." Ethan opened his backpack and pulled out a small cube, sleek, silver, glowing faintly from within. "This one doesn't talk with lights," he explained. "It listens." He placed it on the table and pressed a button. The device projected a soft shimmer of light, and then, like a ghostly echo, it replayed voices. Familiar ones. My uncle's voice saying, "We'll put his name on it later." Another clip. "Don't worry, Anna won't understand the paperwork." David's face went pale. The room fell silent, every breath hanging in the air. Ethan looked straight at him. "You said it was to protect me, but you lied." My mother covered her mouth, stunned. David tried to stammer something about out of context, but the device had already spoken louder than he ever could. Then Ethan pressed another button. The cube dimmed, and a final sentence played, his own voice, recorded quietly. "Integrity means keeping the light inside you, even when someone else tries to steal it." For a long moment, no one moved. The silence felt like justice settling into the room. Sometimes truth doesn't shout. It glows, steady and undeniable. Uncle David left before dessert. He mumbled something about needing air, but we all knew what he was really escaping. My mother sat still for a long time after the door closed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, she looked up at Ethan. "You recorded him?" she asked, her tone a mix of shock and awe. Ethan nodded. "Not to embarrass him. I just wanted the truth to be clear. People forget what they say when they think no one's listening." The cube sat between us on the table, its glow fading to a soft, steady blue. I could see the reflection of it in my mother's eyes, and for the first time, she smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides discomfort, but one that carries quiet pride. The next morning, Uncle David called. His voice was tired, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Anna," he said, "I've withdrawn the patent. I'm sorry. Tell the boy he's got more integrity than I've seen in most grown men. Then he hung up. No explanations. No excuses. Just silence. Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply nodded when I told him, then went back to tinkering in the garage. Mom, he said, I think I'm done building things that make noise. I want to build things that listen instead. People don't listen enough. That was the legacy of Project Orion. Not the device, not the recognition, but the idea that listening is its own kind of invention. A month later, Ethan gave the cube to Noah. He'd reprogrammed it to respond to heartbeats, glowing different colors depending on how fast or slow they were. It helps him show how he feels without needing words, Ethan explained. When Noah's pulse calmed the cube into a soft green glow, he reached over and hugged Ethan. That moment, small, quiet, unrecorded, was the true invention. Not a product, but a bridge. Real brilliance doesn't demand applause. It just finds ways to connect one heart to another. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. It's been 3 years since that dinner, but I still see it vividly whenever I close my eyes. The glint of candlelight, the hum of tension, and the way my son stood tall, holding that quiet blue glow in his palms. Ethan's older now, taller, more sure of himself. He still spends hours in the garage, though it's less cluttered these days. His new projects aren't about gadgets or patents. They're about empathy. He's working with his school to create sensory tools for kids with communication challenges, devices that don't just translate, but understand. Every so often, my uncle calls. The conversations are brief, cautious, but warmer than they used to be. I think that night changed something in him too. Maybe humility has a sound, and he finally learned how to hear it. My mother still insists on family dinners, and though they're quieter now, there's a gentleness around the table that wasn't there before. The crystal bowl still gleams, but what matters most isn't what's served, it's who we've become. Sometimes, when Ethan talks about his ideas, I catch myself studying his hands, the same hands that once trembled as he stood up for himself. Now they move with calm purpose. Mom, he told me recently, I think the opposite of being normal is being true. I'd rather be that. I've carried those words with me ever since. Because the truth is, every family has its storms, its unspoken rivalries, its silent tests of love and integrity. But every so often, someone, maybe a child, maybe even you, chooses light over bitterness. That choice, quiet as it may seem, can transform an entire table, an entire generation. So if you've ever been told that someone you love will never be normal, remember this. Normal isn't the goal. Kindness is. Courage is. The willingness to listen when others turn away, that's where grace begins. And maybe, like Ethan, we're all still learning to let our light speak for itself. If this story touched you, share it. Let someone else remember that integrity, like light, shines brightest when it's tested.